Hello everyone, International Master Matt Bobulas here, and welcome to video series about Tarrasch defense. Today we are going to discuss typical plans, how black can play in Tarrasch defense, and two basic plans that black can do is to push an isolated pawn forward or to attack with minor pieces. So now I'm going to discuss the first plan, pushing an isolated pawn forward. And yeah, just want to show you one game that I played a couple years ago. And I'm just going to show you one game that I played in the Tarrasch defense. And with the white pieces was playing Michał Skalski, and I was playing with black pieces. Okay, white started knight f3, but later it transposed into Tarrasch defense. C4, e6, d4, c5, and you can recognize we've got a Tarrasch defense. Pawn captures, g3. Okay, so you can see that this is Rubinstein's idea, and that bishop from g2 is going to attack the d5 pawn. Knight goes to c6, bishop goes to g2, knight f6, castling, bishop e7. And in that position, my opponent decided to capture at c5 with a pawn. Of course, I captured with a bishop. He played queen c2. Of course, now I just realized that my bishop at c5 is under attack. Of course, I'm forced to move it back. And probably the best place for that bishop is b6. I've got no time to play a6 and create a space at a7. But bishop at b6 is also very good because it works at this important diagonal, important a7 g1 diagonal. He develops knight to c3, castling, and bishop goes to g5. And in that position, I had to take an important decision. Should I push my pawn forward or should I defend it? I just realized that if I play d4 and if I push my pawn forward, he can play knight e4, and you can see that he can totally destroy my queenside position. He can totally, because my knight is pinned, and he makes a very strong pressure over f6 knight. And of course, I just want to keep my king safe. I just don't want to weaken its position. So this is why I have decided to play bishop e6. He played knight a4. The idea, of course, is to remove that very important bishop at the b6. h6, knight captures b6. Of course, I captured with a pawn. If I capture with a queen, he can just capture at f6. And again, my pawn structure is a disaster. Double pawns to isolated pawns, and my king is very, very weak. So I captured with a pawn. A captures b6. Bishop f6, queen captures f6, and my opponent moved queen to d2. And this is critical position. First critical position right after the opening. In that position, okay, just let me evaluate it very briefly. Black has got a bad pawn structure. I mean, black has got double pawns. You can see that there is a double pawn at the b6 and b7. Black also has got an isolated pawn at the d5. White's pawn structure is pretty good, right? Without any weakness. Pieces activity is around being equal. Both kings are very safe. So it looks that white's position is slightly better because of that pawn structure. But now this is the right time for black to start pushing pawn forward. So black plays d4. The idea of that move is to gain that black wins a space in that position. Also, it opens bishop. So with the cooperation with a rook, it attacks a2 pawn. Also, in the future, of course, if it's going to be possible, black will try to push d3 pawn, and that move undermines knight at f3, but it also is exchanging weak isolated pawn at the d4. White plays a3. Of course, white has to defend that a2 pawn. Okay, and black is bringing rook to d8. Of course, the idea is to support isolated pawn to move it forward. Rook c1, rook e8. Another common idea. Rook is doing very well at this semi-open e-file, and it also attacks that e2 pawn that is, maybe it's not a backward pawn, but I would call it semi-backward, because it's not a good idea for white to move it forward, because black has got their pawn that stops from doing it. Rook e1, bishop d5. That bishop is doing a great job here. At this diagonal, it also attacks white's knight at f3, so d3 will be even stronger. If it is possible, d3 will be even stronger, because it undermines that knight. And now, in that position, my opponent made the first inaccuracy. He moved knight h4. Much better idea was to move queen to f4, because when you are fighting against an isolated pawn, common idea is to trade pieces. So queen f4 was much better idea in that position, because it offers a queen's trade. But okay, he moved knight h4. Okay, anyhow, I could exchange my bishops, right? Bishop captures, king captures. And now another important move, because my queen is doing well, my rooks are also pretty active. So now I have decided to bring even more pieces into that position. I have decided to bring my knight to e5. And that knight at e5 is not only very active because it attacks here, it attacks f3, but what is the most important, it prepares d3 move in that position. Now my opponent offers me a queen's trade. Of course, I had to refuse that position. So queen goes to e6, knight goes to f3. And I think that here was the first moment that I could push that pawn forward, but I just wanted to upgrade it a little bit. And I moved my queen to d5. And take a look. Now that queen is very active here, it makes a pin to the knight. And what is another great idea is that black can play g5 and then g4, and according to the basic principles, so put the pressure on the pinned piece, right? And I can use my g-pawn, and I can win that knight at f3. This is why my opponent was of course very afraid of that, and he played h4 move. Of course, the idea is to stop g5 possibilities. But now black can push an isolated pawn forward. And you can see that there is a confusion in white's position what to do with the pawn. Probably the best way of playing for white was to capture that pawn. Knight captures at the d3. Rook captures e8, rook captures e8. And in that position, of course, white plays queen d2, and queen makes a pin in that position. And position is kind of equal, but black has got slightly active, more active pieces in that position. But white didn't play that. White played rook from c to d1, which is a mistake, because now I can capture knight f3, and if he captures with a queen, I can push my pawn d2. You can see how powerful is that isolated pawn if it moves forward. It creates a lot of problems in the white's position. This is what usually that pawn should do. It should create problems in your opponent's position. Much better idea for my opponent was to capture with pawn at f3, but still after rook captures e1, rook captures e1 at d2, black has got very strong pass pawn at the d2. You can see what a carrier for the pawn from d5 to d2, right? Very strong pass pawn at the d2, and black definitely has got big advantage. But my opponent captured with a queen at f3, pawn goes to d2, rook f1, and now I can take advantage of that pin that is here, and I can just capture free pawn at e2. Queen captures d5, rook captures d5. And you can see that in that position, black has got big advantage. Black is up a pawn, and that pawn at d2 is very powerful. And of course, white's plan in that position is to bring out king, because king's activity is very important, and also to push pawns on the king side with the idea of creating pass pawn on the king side. Of course, my opponent cannot play in an active way because he has to take care of that very strong pass pawn at the d2 square. So let's see a couple moves. King f3, rook b1, rook d3. King has to move back. Rook goes to e4, rook d1, and now king moves, right? King h7. King is going that way, and then probably g5, g4, or something like that. b3. Okay, in this position, of course, black has to be very careful, cannot make a blunder. Black has to defend that pawn. So rook defends that pawn. f3, king goes to f5. And now pawn moves forward in that position. f3 pawn is really weak, so black will try to do something with that pawn. g4. Now in that position, of course, white has to capture. King captures and rook goes to c7. And black can just capture that pawn. And you can see that in that position, if black has got two pass pawns, that position is very, very easy to win. Rook goes to d6. Of course, I don't want to give my opponent any chance to counterplay. This is why rook defends that pawn. And pawn moves forward. Rook goes to f2. And pawn moves to f4. And rook goes to e2. And now my opponent realized that it's not possible for him to save that position, because after king f5, I can just play f3, and he cannot stop my pass pawns in that position. And this is why he resigned. So this is the way how can you use that, how can you push that pass pawn, and it creates a lot of confusion in your opponent's position. Thank you very much for watching that. Hope you enjoyed, and hope to see you on the next episode. Thank you very much, and bye.